Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a really fascinating theological paper to discover why the simple, everyday act of eating together is actually an ancient, profound technology for building human connection. I mean, we all eat, right? But we rarely stop to think about the invisible architecture of a meal.
You know, right at the very beginning of the author's work, we find a completely unexpected juxtaposition. We've got Steve Irwin's core message about long-term relationships from a 2004 Larry King Live interview, but it's appearing inside a church setting, specifically St. Cecilia's Church. Irwin makes this great point that we're getting to a place where long-term relationships are really going to be what counts, which perfectly sets the stage for our core theme today.
And that brings us to a huge, universal human puzzle. How do we, as distinct individuals with totally different histories, minds, and bodies, actually forge enduring bonds that matter? How do you take a complete stranger and make them a friend? Well, the absolute oldest answer to this doesn't involve complex treaties or philosophical debates. Actually, it involves a table.
But before we get too academic here, the author humorously grounds us. He notes in the paper's introduction that fasting for 30 days makes a person highly focused on the sheer physical reality of food. It's such a great reminder that while we're about to discuss these high-level concepts of communion and relation, a meal is always, fundamentally, a gritty physical reality.
Think about it. Across Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and practically every human culture on Earth, meals are about way more than just consuming emergency calories to stay alive. They demonstrate relationship. Who gets invited absolutely matters. Who is left out matters too. The food provides physical nourishment, sure, but the connection happening around that plate is just as vital. So, sociologists like to use this heavy term commensality to describe shared individual incorporation within a common relational frame. Okay, that's quite a mouthful. But as the author points out in a section written specifically for his daughter, Angela, you don't really need a sociology degree. You just need to remember what it feels like when grandma decides you look hungry and plops an extra scoop of mashed potatoes onto your plate. You immediately understand that you're being welcomed and cared for. The crucial point here is simply this: the act comes before the abstraction. Human beings knew how to welcome, share, receive, and belong through the physical act of eating long before philosophers and theologians invented fancy abstract words to describe it. You don't read a textbook on the theory of hospitality before you invite someone in from the rain and offer them a cup of tea, right? Your body learns the shape of the relationship way before your brain has the words for it. Okay, let's dive into the invisible rules, what we can call the grammar that dictates how a table actually operates to create unity without destroying our individuality. Just like a spoken language has grammar that makes it make sense, a meal has a relational grammar. If you break these unspoken rules, the meal stops being a shared event. It just evolves into a room full of people chewing. Notice how the roles in any meal have to remain absolutely distinct. The host is not the guest. The giver is definitely not the receiver. Food is actively offered and it must be received. Now, you don't become your host by eating their food, but you absolutely do enter into a real relationship with them through those distinct, separate roles. This creates a pretty amazing sequence of events. An offer creates the possibility of reception, but it's never guaranteed. The guest can accept or they can refuse. Imagine this for a second. If someone prepares a beautiful, elaborate dinner for you, and you sit there, refusing to take a single bite, well, you're communicating something very loud about the relationship, aren't you? To really stress test this whole idea of table grammar, we can look at a famous story shared across the Abrahamic traditions, Abraham receiving unexpected visitors. It's honestly the perfect case study for everything we've just talked about regarding the power of the table. This brilliantly illustrates how the physical act carries the relationship. We actually have two textual traditions of this exact event. In Genesis, Abraham prepares the food, places it before the strangers, and they eat. The peaceful sequence is completed. But in the Quran, Abraham places the food before them, and he notices their hands don't reach for it. And what is Abraham's immediate reaction? Fear. The visitors' failure to eat instantly creates suspicion. Even though they had already verbally greeted each other with peace, the refusal to eat showed that the relationship was totally unresolved. The embodied act carried information that words alone just couldn't. That brings us to a really beautiful truth about this story. Hospitality precedes full recognition. Abraham didn't wait around for a background check. He saw strangers and he transformed them into guests by making room and providing for them well before he fully understood who they were, before he even realized they were carrying a divine message. The table is literally the place where I don't know you transforms into you have a place here.
Now, let's change the scale a bit. We're moving from a single household's hospitality to an entire people. When we look at the history of Israel, the ritual meal actually acts as a historical preservation technology. It moves from a spontaneous act in a tent to a commanded, ongoing practice for a whole nation. This builds so powerfully across generations through what the author calls a continuity channel. You obviously can't recreate a founding historical event like the Exodus, but by attaching that memory to a specific, repeating meal, a child doesn't just sit through a dry history lecture. When they ask, "Why is this night different?" they actually enter the inherited relationship through the bodily, physical act of eating. The temporal reach of these meals is just incredible. Whether it's looking backward to remember past deliverance with the Passover lamb, or depending on God's present daily provision in the wilderness with manna, the covenant literally enters the body. The relationship isn't just some abstract floating idea. It is chewed, swallowed, and completely relied upon for survival. So, what does all of this mean for the ultimate connection between humanity and the divine? We've seen that meals hold distinct individuals together in a shared event. Now we can map that exact same grammar onto the ultimate relationship.
It leads us directly to this overarching concept. At a table, the host remains the host, and the guest remains the guest. Everyone eats personally, yet everyone shares one single meal. This physical picture perfectly explains the super dense theological concept of communion. It's real unity without erasing our differences. It is distinction without severance, and unity without collapse. You don't have to melt into some cosmic blob to be united with God or with other people. You remain you, but you truly participate in a shared reality. At the end of the day, it all comes down to one beautifully simple summary: all roads lead to supper. Whether humanity is searching for truth, for justice, for memory, or for belonging, all those paths raise the exact same question: how do distinct persons share a common good without losing who they are? And the answer, time and time again, looks remarkably like a table.
Since supper is one of the oldest, simplest, and most incredibly durable human ways of showing what true communion looks like, it leaves us with one really provocative thought to consider tonight. If the table is where strangers become guests, where history is preserved, and where unity is forged without erasing who we are, who is at your table, and who is being left outside? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.